Okay, guys, hold on. That background noise is really loud. Hold on. Okay. Sound. Okay, hopefully that'll go away. Where's the chat? Pull the chat over here. Full screen. Hey, what's up, hey, what's up, everybody? Hey, Hermes. Hey, Taco Loco. Everybody else who's jumped on early. Appreciate you jumping in here. Today's plan and agenda is to go over the EBO Scientist post that was posted on Reddit back in July. So just give me 1 second and then we'll get started here. Okay, let's do this thing, folks. Okay, well, it's 7 o'clock. I'm going to start off with a little bit of background for people who are not aware of the situation in the EBO Scientist post. So, back on July 6, 2023, there was a post that appeared on the subreddit Aliens. And in this post, it was called EBO Biologist Q&A. And this was an account that I don't know the age of the account, if it was relatively new. But this account posted an extremely long and detailed physiology of what they claimed was an extra biological organism, in other words, alien. And this post got a lot of notoriety because they started answering questions in the middle of the chat after they posted it. And they were answering a bunch of questions to people. And while they were in the middle of answering questions, their account got deleted. Their account got deleted, and then all of the posts got scrubbed within the same day. So I found this very compelling. I saw it in real time as it was getting deleted. And there was parts of it that I found compelling that I've talked about on my stream. The parts that I found were compelling was the stuff related to the laboratory that they describe in this. And so from that perspective, I can say that having worked in IT and worked in laboratory equipment, that part all seemed to check out for me. A bunch of other people that have, PhDs or advanced understanding of the various scientific degrees that you would need to create this. I think that no one really found any major issues with it, other than I think they referred to like one of the bones the wrong way, like medial versus distal or something like that. So if anyone's in the chat that knows, we can go over that. The plan here today, I'm going to try to keep this pretty short, as short as I can. I'm going to read through it. I thought about doing the AI to play through it, but I think that I can get through it here today. And it's kind of long. So, and please forgive me if I butcher any aspects of the scientific knowledge here. So I'm going to read through the whole thing. And then after I read through the whole thing, I'm going to bring people up. Anyone who wants to ask questions about it, give their opinions on it, if you think it's fake or you think it's real or whatever. There's some pretty interesting stuff in here, especially if I want you guys, while I'm reading through this, to be thinking about some of these narratives that have been out there related to non-human intelligence, what some of the prominent figures in UFOlogy have been saying about them. Particularly one thing today that I saw floating around on Twitter where I think it was Jeremy Corbell mentioning something about containers and humans being containers. I think that there's this idea of this spiritual aspect to the phenomenon. And when we get to the end of this, I think you'll find something pretty interesting in there. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start. Okay. Let me get a sip of my coffee here and we'll get going. Okay, I'm cooking. And hey, everybody who's jumped in, appreciate you guys jumping in, getting in early on this. So for anybody who catches it later, you can watch the stream I'll also post quickly the link in the chat to the stream if you want to see for yourself what we're going over here. Okay. I think that should be good. There it goes. It'll show up, I think, in a second. Okay, here we go. So, EBO Biologist Q&A Reddit 2023. It seems like all my comments are being deleted. I will post answer at the end of the message. From the late 2000s to the mid-2010s, I worked as a molecular biologist for the national security contractor in a program to study exobiospheric organisms, EBO. The aim of the program was to elucidate, I'm mispronouncing that word, the genome and proteome basis of these organisms. Essentially, what they're talking about there is they're talking about trying to understand the genome of the biology of the biospheric organisms. Although the study of the OBCs has been ongoing for decades in other programs, the new high-throughput DNA sequencing technologies of the late 1990s unlocked stagnant research in this area. Since then, several breakthroughs have led to significant advances in our understanding of the genome and proteome of these beings. What we've learned so far has enabled us to outline some disconcerting perspectives about our place in the universe. Previously, we discovered that the EBO genome is a chimera of genomes from our own biosphere and from an unknown one. They are artificial, ephemeral, and disposable organisms that are created for a purpose that still partially eludes us. I'll be substantiating my statements after this brief introduction. For the reason of disclosing these secrets is quite simple. I believe that every human being has the right to know the truth, and that to progress, humanity needs to divest itself of certain institutions and organizations that will probably not survive these revelations in the long term. I'm aware that I'll have very little impact in this regard, but I still believe that small leaks are necessary to break the dam of misinformation on this topic. When the government will eventually reveal these secrets, there will be undoubtedly social upheaval, but in my opinion, the longer we wait, the worse it will be. I choose to divulge what I know anonymously, out of selfishness for the well-being of myself and my family. I am aware that this diminishes the reach and credibility of my message, but it's the furthest I'm willing to go. I choose this forum, this is the alien subreddit forum, because it offers good compromise between anonymity and popularity. In order to protect my anonymity, I will purposely be vague or even contradictory about any information that could identify me, date, education, role, etc. I'll even introduce red herrings in this respect. I want to make it clear that any information related to the subject of my research will not be treated in this way. Before going any further, please excuse me if you find it difficult to understand what I'm explaining. Some parts of my text are very technical. It's difficult to find the right balance between vulgarization and scientific explanation. I'll continue by talking about myself. What's the point of talking about me knowing that the information will be necessary be misleading? I simply want to introduce a perspective on the type of people who work there, normal scientists. I have a PhD in molecular biology. I didn't actively seek to become part of this program. Rather, it was a stroke of luck that introduced me to one of the senior scientists. I met this person at a conference where I was presenting a poster on my PhD research. When I think back, I don't believe he was impressed by what I was presenting, because it was quite frankly a project that wasn't going anywhere. I think it was rather the most important aspect of a professional life, the attitude and ease with which you make connections. Shortly afterwards, I graduated and received a call from this person offering me a position. At the time, everything pointed me to working in a regular laboratory. I did a series of 3 increasingly suspicious interviews, each in a different location, where my scientific background and knowledge became less and less relevant. The first was 2 of the senior scientists, the second and third with people I've never seen again and who are obviously not interested in science. Sometime after the interview, I was asked to go to a 4th location where what seemed to be like a corporate lawyer presented me with an NDA. He made sure not only to explain every detail, but also that I understood the consequence of not respecting it. The first employment weeks were by far the most memorable, although I spent most of that time in a depressing archive room. It consists almost exclusively of reading about the subject of study and getting us up to speed. There's no secret Wikipedia or even reference book to guide us. These are only dry reports, memos, presentations, procedures, and SOPs. Standard Operating Procedures, what that stands for. These documents are almost exclusively about the biology of the EBOs, but there are also a few that deal with other subjects such as their food, religion, or culture. There were no documents on their technology. As I mentioned above, the aim of the project is to gain a better understanding of the EBO genome and proteome. I'm probably butchering that. To achieve this, a team of around 20 scientists, 4 senior scientists, and a director were involved. The scientists, like myself, had as their main responsibility to carry out the technical work. As each scientist had, to my knowledge, a PhD, we were all somewhat overqualified for what is ultimately a technician's job. The senior scientists, who make full use of their diplomas, had the task of designing the assays and had a supervisory responsibility. They were also in charge of training new employees and sometimes even came in to do technical work. The director, of course, was the person in charge who dictated the priorities to the senior scientists. He was rarely on site, and the few times he was, it was to attend meetings. Other than that scientific staff, there were security guards working for one subcontractor or another. There were no support staff such as janitors or maintenance workers. Scientists were responsible for this kind of work. In addition, logistical constraints ensured that every scientist is capable of carrying out any technical activity. The laboratory itself is located in Fort Detrick, Maryland, in a building used for legitimate biomedical research. The clandestine operations are carried out in a restricted part of the basement, out of sight from the regular workers. Contrary to what one might imagine, the biosafety level is not maximal for this type of research. Indeed, the lab containing the EBO samples or derived cell cultures is BSL-3, while the lab where the assays are conducted is only BSL-2. The BSL-3 area of the facility includes a freezer room and cell culture lab and is only accessible through an antechamber from the BSL-2 section. EBO carcasses are preserved in horizontal freezers at a temperature of minus 80 degrees centigrade nominal. To maximize the preservation of these carcasses, they are preserved in vacuum bags, and the air room is controlled to minimize humidity. There are only 4 bodies and none of them are complete. It's obvious that these creatures have died of some result of some major trauma. I never witnessed a motorcycle accident fatality, but it's probably looks similar to this. It is acknowledged that there are several more EBO carcasses at other locations. The cell culture laboratory, as its name suggests, is where cell lines derived from EBOs are grown and related activities are performed. I'll talk in more detail about these specific cell lines later on. The BSL-2 part is mainly used for assays, immunochemistry, genetic engineering, immunocytochemistry, storage, etc. There's also a cell culture lab, but this is used for more traditional cell lines. Other than the labs, there are all of these amenities that you could find in an office. Note that the internet access is limited to senior staff and above. There is, however, an intranet for bioinformatics needs. On the subject of biology of these beings, I'll start by discussing the genetics, then their gross anatomy, and finally their biological systems. For the sake of clarity, the information that I provide here is an aggregation of what I have observed and what I have read. I will make many comparisons with human anatomy because that is the most logical reference. The genetics. First, I'd like to discuss the genetics. Their genetics are like ours based on DNA. This fact was very puzzling for me when I first learned about it. We imagined that the beings were from an alternate biosphere would have genetics based on a completely foreign biochemical system, and surprisingly, this is not the case. Several conclusions can be drawn from this surprising revelation. The one that immediately comes to mind is that our biosphere and theirs share a common ancestry. Their eukaryotes, I'm butchering that, which means their cells have nuclei containing genetic material, which suggests that their biosphere would have been separated from ours sometime after the appearance of this type of organism. The term exobiospheric organism is actually a misnomer, but as it's a historical term, it's still used. Their genetics are not only based on the same genetic system, but they're also even compatible with our own cellular machinery. This means that you can take a human gene and insert it into an EBO cell, and that gene will be translated into a protein, and this of course works in reverse with the human genome inserted into the EBO cell. There are important differences in the post-translational modifications that will make the final protein non-functional, but I'll discuss this later. Their genome consists of 16 circular chromosomes. You're probably familiar with the concept of intergenetic region or junk DNA. These are basically DNA sequences that don't code for proteins. These are evolutionary residues. These are evolutionary residues, transposons, inactivated genes, and so on. To give you an idea, in humans, intergenetic regions represent approximately 99% of our genome. I'm aware that these sequences aren't completely useless. They can be used as histone anchors, as buffers to protect coding DNA from radiation, or even as alternate open reading frames, but that's rather peripheral. What's particularly striking about the EBO genome is the uniformity of these intergenetic regions. We see the same sequences repeated everywhere, and the distance in BP between the genes is virtually the same throughout the genome. The result is a minimalist, highly condensed genome. In fact, it's much smaller than ours. Moreover, the quantity of protein-coding genes is even significantly lower than ours, probably due to genetic refinement, but also to biological processes that are absent in the EBO. The uniformity of these sequences is a major indication of the artificiality of these beings. There's no complex organism on Earth that has such elegance in its sequences. There's no evolutionary pressure that can lead to this type of characteristic other than genetic engineering. Speaking of genetic engineering, following sequence of their genomes, we noticed a troubling universal characteristic in the 5 foot of their regulatory sequence, or is it 5 degree of the regulatory sequence of each gene, which we call the tripalindromic region. The TPR are 134 BP sequences containing, as its name suggests, 3 palindromes. In genetics, a palindrome is a DNA sequence that, when read in the same direction, gives the same sequence on both DNA strands. They serve both as a flag and as a binding site for proteins. The 3 palindromes in the TPR are distinct from one another and have been poetically named 5P TPR, MTPR, and 3 degree TPR. The TPR is composed in 5 degree/3 degree order of 5 degree TPR, 12 BP spacer, chromosomal address, 12 BP spacer, MTPR, 12 BP spacer, gene address, 12 PB spacer, and 3 degree TPR. The chromosomal address is composed of 4 BP and is identical in each TPR of the same chromosome, but distinct between each of the 16 chromosomes of the genome. The gene address is a 64 BP sequence that is unique for each gene in the whole genome. It is therefore understandable that the TPR serves as a unique address not only for numerically identifying the gene, but also for identifying its chromosomal location. For those with only a basic knowledge of genetics, this is completely unheard of. No living thing in our biosphere has this kind of precise address in its genome. Once again, the presence of TPR cannot be explained by evolutionary pressure, but only by genetic engineering on a genomic scale. TPR opens the door to several possibilities. One of them suggests that the EBO geneticist can insert or remove a gene from a cell in a way that is far more targeted and efficient than our technology allows. No proteins have been identified in the EBO genome that interact with TPR. Rather, we believe that these proteins are exclusively targeted by external genetic engineering tools, probably used at the zygotic stage of the embryonic development. The nature of these tools is unclear, but we definitely don't have anything like them. The probable absence of these proteins from the genome is further indication that their artificiality. Given the high probability of artificiality of their genome and the apparent ease of modifying it with biomolecular tools, it's not out of the question that there could be polymorphism between individuals depending on their role and function. In other words, an individual could be genetically designed to have characteristics that give it an advantage in performing a given task, like soldier ants and worker ants in an anthill. Note that these previous statements are speculation. To my knowledge, only one individual genome has been sequenced. I can't make a definitive statement on the genetic variation between individuals. As some people have noticed, this is very similar to the idea of CRISPR analysis that we have. That's just me commentating. I've talked a lot about intergenetic regions. Now I'll briefly discuss the intragenetic sequences. Briefly, because there's not a lot less to say despite its obvious importance. Much like ours, their genes have silencers, enhancers, promoters, 5-degree UTRs, exons, introns, 3-degree UTRs, etc. There are many genes analogous to ours, which is not surprising given the compatibility of our cellular machinery. What's disturbing is that some of the genes correspond directly, nucleotide by nucleotide, with known human genes or even some animal genes. For these genes, there doesn't seem to be any artificial refinement, but rather a crude copying and pasting. Why they do it is nebulous and still subject to conjecture. There are also many genes which are not found in our biosphere, whose role has not been identified. Finding the purpose of these novel genes is one of the aims of the program. I'd like to note that before going any further, that this is a heterogeneity of genes of known and unknown origin is an this heterogeneity of genes is known and unknown origin is undeniable proof of the artificiality of EBOs. Okay, so they're concluding that the EBOs are of artificial nature, they're produced. To conclude with the genetics, the mitochondrial genome, at the time I was working there, had not yet been sequenced. It's safe to assume that this genome would also be streamlined and possibly has some versions of TPR. Transcription and translation and protein expression. I briefly introduced the differences in post-translational modifications between human and EBO. This is hardly a surprise, as we often see the same thing between different terrestrial species. Obtaining a viable protein from a DNA sequence is a complex process involving hundreds of protein intermediates, each with precise and essential role. A minor variation in this assembly line can lead to functional irregularities in the final product. So it's no surprise that there are setbacks along the way when the first EBO gene transfection attempts failed to produce the desired functional protein in human cell lines. Fortunately for us, the work of what I imagine to be another team at another site has led to the development of an EBO cell line named EPI-G11, derived from epithelial tissues. With this tool in our hands, we were able to transfect and overexpress proteins of interest in order to eventually purify and study them. For your information, we use biological ballistics delivery system, aka a gene gun, for our transfection needs because other methods are not very effective with the cells of this line. For example, the viral vectors tests cannot be internalized by EPI-G11, and lipofection is too lethal. EPI-G11, like most eukaryotic cell lines, enters a phase of exponential growth when exposed to the fetal bovine serum. It's only half surprising that a cell line from such an exotic source should be sensitive to the growth factors present in FBS, fetal bovine syndrome. In my opinion, this can be explained by the addition of animal genes to the genome, such as growth receptors. Now, the gross anatomy. They are morphologically very similar to the gray aliens that are a part of modern folklore. Their height is around 150 centimeters. They have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. Still, there's some notable differences. The skin. The gray skin that is often described in folklore is in fact a biosynthetic film which likely serves to protect the EBO from a hostile environment. It doesn't provide effective protection against temperature changes, but it does offer adequate protection against the passages of liquids. It's possible that this film confers other advantages, but to my knowledge on the subject is limited. Under the gray film, the epidermis is rather white, and the texture is very regular and without any hair. We do not see any defect other than their folds near their joints. It's described as greasy in one report, but that's not something I've observed. The same report states that a strong lingering smell of burnt hair and ammonia is present when the film is removed. There are a lot of pores in the skin, crossing from the epidermis to a gland into the hypodermis. These glands and pores are the terminal part of their excretory sudoriferous system, which could explain the previously mentioned smell. What they're saying is this is how they poop. Head. The head contains 2 large, oversized eyes, 2 nostrils, without protuberance, a narrow mouth without lips, and 2 ear canals without areoticles. I don't know, ears maybe. There's a mandible, but the musculature is vestigial. There are no teeth or tongue in the oral cavity. These nasal cavities where the nostrils meet is compact and does not rise cranially, but extends axially. There appears to be no equivalent to the olfactory bulb in the nasal cavity. The mouth leads directly to the esophagus and the nasal cavity to the trachea. The trachea and esophagus do not communicate. Like the skin, the eyes are covered with a semi-transparent biosynthetic film that offers the same environmental protection while providing protection against certain wavelengths and light intensity. When the film is removed, a more traditional eye is revealed. It is about 2 to 3 times larger than a human eye, and there are no eyelids. The size of their eyes suggests that they have excellent night vision. It seems paradoxical to cover them with a semi-opaque film. Perhaps they only need to wear it in a bright environment. Their sclera is the same color as their skin. The iris is pale gray, and the pupil is black and oversized. The lens is rounder than a human, and the muscular culture used to adjust the focus is more developed. On the retina, there are at least 6 types of cone cells. The responsiveness of each of these 6 types of cones is specific to a wavelength band, with a minimum overlap between the other. The result is a broader visible spectrum. Ear. As mentioned, the outer ear has no auricle, and the ear canal is unremarkable. The inner ear has all the characteristics of a typical vestibular and cochlear system, although the curvature of the cochlea is more pronounced than a human. This probably results in greater hearing acuity for lower frequencies. Brain. The brain is tetraspheric, i.e. composed of 4 major sections. These sections are separated by transverse and longitudinal fissures and are connected to the central lobe, which acts as a brainstem and cerebellum. The volume of the brain is around 28% superior to that of a man of the same height. It has a much more pronounced level of gyration than an average human. Moreover, the ratio of glial cells to neurons is also slightly higher than in humans. It is important to mention the presence of the nodules on the central lobe. Histological analysis of these structures reveals a kind of intricate biological circuitry. It is speculated that these nodules are essential to interact with their technology. Consequently, determining the proteome of their structures is an absolute priority for the program. Neck. The neck is proportionately longer than that of a human. At the same time, it is relatively thin. As mentioned, the esophagus and the trachea are separate. There are no vocal cords in this region. The thorax. The musculature of the thorax is underdeveloped. Muscles equivalent to the pectoralis major can be seen. We can also see that there is a trapezius and deltoid muscles. The sternocleidomastoids are well defined. The rib and sternum are clearly visible. There are no nipples. Abdomen. The abdomen is wider than the thorax and bulges straight forward. There is no navel. Pelvis. The pelvic bones are apparent. There are no genitals or anus. Hands and feet. The hands have 4 digits, including an opposable thumb on the medial side. They have no nails, and the texture of their fingerprints is composed of concentric circles. Fingers are proportionally much longer than humans. Unlike humans, fingular musculature is entirely intrinsic to the hand. In other words, the muscles used to move the fingers are not in the forearm, but entirely located in the hands. At first glance, the feet consist of just 2 digits, but necropsy soon determined that each toe was made up of 2 fused digits. The medial toe is marginally longer than the distal toe. The feet are relatively longer and narrower than in a human. Their musculature, however, is vestigial. The EBO's endoskeleton is very similar to ours, at least in terms of composition. There's collagen, hydroxyapatite, but also copper oxide crystals where marrow would normally be found. The role of these crystals has not been established, but it is not crystallopathic condition. It's not a crystallopathic condition. The blood cells of the myeloid lineage, or the equivalent of these creatures, therefore mature in a different location than in humans, i.e. in the thymus like an organ. A transverse section of the bone reveals osteon and osteocytes. There appear to be few osteoblasts and no osteoclasts. This indicates that the bones are no longer growing and cannot absorb the minerals present or adapt mechanically to changes in posture. Okay, the biological system. Hopefully you guys are still up with us here. Respiratory system. Their circular respiration is equivalent to ours, i.e., they need to oxidize organic components to produce energy. Their lungs have no reciprocating action, but rather have a unidirectional flow of air similar to that seen in birds, which is more efficient than ours. It is speculated this is in response to the brain's elevated metabolic needs. Vocalization is produced by the vibrating of the wall membrane at the junction between the two air sacs. The circulatory system of EBOs is rather analogous to ours. The heart is located in the mediastinum, but in a more medial position, directly beneath the sternum. The heart has two ventricles and two atria. There's an aorta, a pulmonary vein, a pulmonary artery, and a vena cava. Blood flowing to the pulmonary cavities or capillaries via the pulmonary artery is pumped against the flow of air, maximizing gas exchange efficiency. The blood-gas barrier is relatively narrow in these capillaries, at least compared to a human. The oxygen-rich blood is then returned to the heart and then expelled into the aorta and to the rest of the body. Before returning to the heart, the blood will pass through a hepatorenal organ, which, among other things, filters and controls osmotic pressure of the blood. The blood itself is also analogous to that of a human. However, the proportion of plasma is much higher. Albumin is in similar proportion, hormone levels are much lower, metal ion levels are much higher, particularly copper, and glucose levels are significantly higher. The color of the blood is brownish, given the high proportion of plasma and concentration of the metal ions. On the cellular side, there are erythrocytes, which, in addition to the hemoglobin for binding oxygen, display several complexities capable of binding copper ions. It's not clear what the role these copper ions play, but we believe it neutralizes blood ammonia, among other things. Several cell types with leukocyte characteristics have been observed, but no comprehensive knowledge exists on them. Platelets are present, but in a smaller proportion than in humans. The excretio pseudoferrous system. So this is, again, the way they poop. This system is completely different from what I've seen. As mentioned earlier, there is no large orifice like an anus or a urethra to get rid of biological waste. Instead, there are countless small pores on the surface of the skin. There is a large medial organ called the hepatorenal organ, which acts as both a kidney and liver and is central to maintaining homeostasis. The organ is highly vascularized, and the blood must pass through it before returning to the heart. Its role is, among other things, to purify the blood of metabolic waste. Waste is excreted into the equivalent of the ureter, which branches out into four. Each branch flows towards one of the four limbs, and in turn, these branches divide until they end up as thousands of excretory pores. The motility of this excretory system is mediated by a weak peristalsis at the proximal level and on the four major branches. The peristalsis ceases around the first distal junction. As there is no urea cycle, the ammonia concentration at the exit of the hepatorenal organ is very high. This ammonia is carried to the pores and gives a distinct odor I mentioned before. The rationale behind this unusual excretory system is directly related to this excreted ammonia, which enables thermal regulation by evaporating on its skin's surface. The greater the physical effort, the greater the metabolism. This in turn leads to a rise in temperature and a corresponding increase in metabolic waste via amino acid catabolism. This leads to an increase in filtration and ammonia excretion, which ultimately lowers the body temperature. Digestive system. The digestive system is extremely underdeveloped. There is no stomach in the familiar sense. However, there is a pseudostomach located at the transition between the thoracic and abdominal cavities. This organ is not involved in digestion, but only serves as a reservoir. A sphincter controls the flow of food into the intestine. The intestine is limited to the equivalent of our small intestine, i.e., it only serves to absorb liquids and nutrients and acts as the main digestion site. It has villi and microvilli like ours. The intestine ends in the hepatorenal organ, where non-digested matter is transported to the ureter and excretory system. Residues are dissolved in the ammonia of metabolic waste for excretion. There's an organ near the pseudostomachal region, the pseudostomachal sphincter, that secretes digestive enzymes directly into the intestine. This organ is inspirationally called the digestive organ. It secretes mainly proteolytic enzymes and glycoside hydrolyses. Given the absence of teeth, the narrowness and the rigidity of the esophagus, and the absence of a true stomach and an absence of defecation, it is strongly believed that the EBOs can only consume food in liquid form. It is assumed that given the high metabolic rate of their brains, this food would have a high carbohydrate concentration. In order to meet the other metabolic needs, there must also be a high protein content in the food consumed. These two statements are supported by the type of enzyme secreted by the digestive organ. It is therefore speculated that the food consumed is a short broth rich in sugar and protein, which probably has a high copper content. Given the strict limitations on the type of food they consume, it's unlikely that this type of creature could survive in our biosphere without technological support. That's a very interesting comment there. Endocrine system. Knowledge of the endocrine system is minimal. We know that cells are receptive to bovine growth hormones, so it is assumed that certain functions are regulated by such a system. Endocrine mechanisms are very complex, and it goes without saying that they are best studied on living subjects. The immune system. The immune system is another unknown. There seems to be an innate immune system, but there does not seem to be any adaptive immunity, at least not similar to what is known. There is a thymus-like organ near the heart that's proportionally longer than in humans. This organ seems to be where all the blood cells mature. Some cells have leukocyte characteristics such as granularity. The immune cells that germinate here have a high copper concentration. The surface receptors of innate immune cells have not yet been characterized, so we might as well say that the work remains to be done. Nervous system. The nervous system is also relatively similar. The spinal cord begins at the base of the central lobe of the brain and propagates down through the vertebral column. In the vertebrae, there are ganglia made of afferent and efferent neurons. In short, other than the CNS, the central nervous system, there is nothing out of the ordinary. The musculoskeletal system. The musculoskeletal system is very ordinary, albeit underdeveloped. Most of the human skeletal muscles have an equivalent. Only the hands, feet, forearms are different. It should be noted that the proportion of type 1 and type 2 muscular fibers is different from that in humans. Indeed, type 1 outnumbers type 2 by a factor of about 10. Artificial system. We speculate that the artificial molecular machines may be present in the body, and that copper, if present, would be essential to the function of assembly. Importantly, no AMMs have been observed. Okay, so that is the end of the beginning part of it. So I'm going to pull up a couple people, and then we're going to get into the questions related to it as well. I just need a short break before we start digging into the questions. So that was just the beginning here of the EBO Scientist post. And then after this, what ends up happening is that they go into a bunch of questions, which I'm going to go to after a short intermission here, where Redditors ask questions related to the story and the person answer the questions in real time. So at this time, I'd like to see if anyone wants to jump up and request speakership and let me know if you're interested in talking. I'll probably just bring a few people up that I know as well that have been talking before. And while we're doing that as well, I am going to just recap. So some of the interesting things that I read related to this, first of all, I have background in the laboratory equipment. So this person mentions that they would have been a lab tech if not had gone into like this kind of field. They would have gotten into something related to a regular laboratory. The lab equipment that I heard seems to check out in general. As you guys could understand, I definitely do not have background in all the science that was going on here, so I probably mispronounced several of those scientific terminologies that are out there. The genetics, I think that the key aspects from what I heard were that this is very similar to a gray alien, that this is a biologically manufactured being, and the reason why they think that is because their DNA and cell line is very compact and very efficient, and that they don't have all the excess junk DNA that we have. They do not secrete waste the same way we do. They secrete ammonia through the pores in their skin. It's pretty wild. That part, it makes me wonder about what was it, the Vigaris, whatever, the James Fox's documentary, where the people were talking about potentially seeing alien beings, and that those beings potentially were, secreting an ammonia smell. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I'm gonna pull up a couple other people. If you guys want to chat, let me know. Feel free to jump in. And then what else did I find interesting? The part about the eyes and there being this film over their skin in general. A lot of this stuff seems to mesh with what we think of as historical UFOlogy lore regarding the beings. It goes into extreme amounts of detail about each of these biological systems that are out there. I think that the only one where people were able to poke holes in, and we'll get to the comments of the people who replied to this, were the parts where I think they talked about the joints. I'm not sure if that was accurate or not. Virginia, I think people are saying. That was the sighting that James Fox did a whole documentary on in general. And so that was pretty interesting. Okay, well, everybody's being shy. So I'm going to go ahead and just go straight to the questions. Give me 1 second and we'll get going on those. Somebody wants to jump up. Okay, cool. Ben. Okay, Ben, go for it, man. Welcome aboard.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Ashton, this is also in line with what John Lear was saying back in the 80s. There's a really good George Knapp interview with Lear, and he also mentions the secreting of excrement out of the skin, which I think is like very interesting that detail was in line with this post. So just wanted to mention that.
Awesome, man. Yeah, so let me know if you have other questions as we go, because I just realized that that actually wasn't the part where the questions begin. So this is where he asked himself, or he or she, we don't know if it's a man or a woman, they asked themselves a few questions. So I'm going to keep going here after a short little break. So question 1. Amazing story. Have you shared this with the Senate Selection Committee on Intelligence or with the AARO? And do you have any evidence to back this up? Thank you. No, and no, I haven't, and no, I won't. It sounds like a honey trap to me. I will not place my life in the hands of politicians. I have no proof other than this message. I know it's not much, but it's what I'm prepared to offer. Question 2. Well, that was a read. So they are bioengineered worker bees. Any elemental components that are unattributable to our biome? Yes, knowing that they are disposable, unable to live independently without technological support, and that they're ephemeral. The only suitable hypothesis is that they are alive only to accomplish their task. Can you clarify your question about elemental components? Question 3. I haven't read everything in detail, but can you expand on the document on their religion? EBOs believe that their soul is not an extension of the individual, but rather a fundamental characteristic of the nature that expresses itself as a field, not unlike gravity. In the presence of life, this field acquires complexity, resulting in negative entropy, if that makes sense. This gain in complexity is directly correlated with the concentration of living organisms in a given location. With time and with the right conditions, life in turn becomes more complex until the appearance of sentient life. After reaching this threshold, the field begins to express itself through these sentient beings, forming what we call the soul. Through their life experiences, sentient beings will in turn influence the field in a sort of positive feedback loop. This in turn further accelerates the complexity of the field. Eventually, when the field reaches a critical mass, there will be a sort of apotheosis. It is not clear what this means in practical terms, but this quest for apotheosis seems to be the EBO's main motivation. The author of the document added his reflections and interpretations as an appendix. He specified that for them, the soul field is not a belief, but an obvious truth. He argues that the soul loses the individuality after death, but that memory and experience persist as part of the field. This fact would influence the physiology and culture of the EBOs, resulting in a society that does not fear death, but which places no importance or reverence on individuality. This belief compels them to seed life, shape it, nurture it, monitor it, and influence it for the ultimate purpose of creating this apotheosis. Paradoxically, they have little or no respect for an individual's well-being. Please be advised that I'm speaking from memory of something that I read more than 10 years ago. So take it with a grain of salt. Also, I'm not a philosopher or an artist, so please excuse my struggles to properly formulate the concepts of my dry terminology. Finally, note that this information comes from a document whose author was directly interacting with an EBO. It is not specified whether it was an ambassador, a crash survivor, or a prisoner. The means of communication were not specified either. Somebody else, question 4. WTF, he dropped the location of the lab. Battelle National Biodefense Institute. It's on a Google map. So that's the part where they finish up with, I guess that was like edited into their post, I think. Some of the Q&A may dig into it might reverse trend on that question 3. But the question 3 part is really interesting. So the question 3 part is, the part about the soul and whether or not the soul is this kind of extension of this field and this fundamental relationship to the universe in general. And they think that, essentially, like I was talking about at the beginning of this, that if you believe this, at least, that there's a document out there that says these EBOs or aliens think that the soul is the ultimate growth mechanism and potentially our purpose for life, and that we are essentially containers for this soul, which, as they say, paradoxically, they then have essentially no respect for an individual's well-being. So the reason why I think that part's interesting is that I've always mentioned this idea that, aliens would think of us like ants, right? And then this kind of would explain why they might think of that. This is also a unifier between what human theory might be versus, religion and stuff like that, the spirit, and, God in general. This kind of is a connection there to what the EBO might think. Ben or Dewar, anybody up here have any comments on that, or anybody else who wants to come up and comment on that before I go on?
Sure. I guess one thing I'm pretty curious about is assuming it's there seems to be like a consensus that this is an artificial organism designed for a specific purpose, almost kind of like a worker bee. And if I'm just considering like a more advanced civilization that is able to do this kind of precise, gene editing of itself and has this kind of advanced understanding, what's the benefit of, if you're going to send a worker bee, why a biological one? Why grow something biological versus maybe something mechanical? Like if you could, wouldn't it be easier to kind of create something mechanical or assemble something mechanical to send and do some kind of job versus growing something biological? I'm just trying to understand why they would prefer one over the other if it's just a worker bee anyway. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, that's a good thought. And I would say that if you achieve a certain level of technological advancement, perhaps one is not more complicated than the other, right? But I think that is a good question. Why not have computers do all the hard work? Why not make an android who can do it as opposed to a conscious being? Perhaps it's that, again, the idea of the soul, right? Where what's the difference between an android that has AI versus a human? Maybe this idea that there's a soul that can kind of make decisions on the fly. Almost like the difference between quantum computing and standard computing would be a thought.
Yeah, that makes sense. That yeah, I think like maybe that points to the fact that maybe the idea of whatever this soul is, whatever that concept is, maybe it can't be anchored to something that's kind of binary or mechanical. Maybe it can only be anchored to something that was biological. Maybe that's kind of a barrier. Maybe just it interfaces with one and not the other. I don't know. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's interesting to kind of conceptualize about, if they are capable, like you said, obviously they'd be capable of doing the job one way or another. But it's interesting to think about why they would go the biological route.
Yeah, no, definitely. Ben or Shai Keenan, do you guys have thoughts? Welcome aboard.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's very interesting that they also have DNA, even though it's clearly engineered. it does make you wonder because, you go back to the missing link, and perhaps we are artificial intelligence without knowing it, right? We were designed millennia ago for some purpose that, is unknown, unbeknownst to us. So that also makes me question a lot about, human origins as well. I was going to also just comment that Bob Lazar, again, I had mentioned John Lear before, but Bob Lazar also claimed that he had read that, humans are containers of souls, which also is in line with this post. So there's just a lot of intricacies in this. And what I wanted to ask you, planning on doing kind of a deep dive into this, similar to how you've done with the MH370, just given that this is so much more recent, that there's an actual human being out there that's clearly posted this that, could potentially be tracked down or willing to speak to you. Does this have legs for you?
So I think it's really interesting, but I don't plan on investigating it much further. My only goal with this was to try to get more information out there about it so that people were aware of it, because I had realized that a lot of people had never heard about this, and the fact that it was deleted in one day, I thought was really suspicious. So whenever I see stuff like that, then I kind of want to post more about it. And as you guys could see from, how long that was. I mean, what was that like? It was like 30 minutes of me reading that stuff, right? That was, and we haven't even got through all the questions yet. Like, that is an extremely detailed analytical report. And I don't have all the PhDs required to know if half the words were even real that I was saying there. But I have a feeling that they do check out. And again, the thing I like about it is it's verifiable information, right? Anytime I read something and it's not just, oh, it's a story, it's more of like, here's a detailed analysis of the whole physiology. I go, okay, well, could this check out? Like, if you made a bean like this, would it work? And then the fact that, like you just mentioned, it connects to so many other stories that are out there in ufology. This is why it kind of connected and resonated with me. I don't know who was up first. Let's go to Shai Keenan first, and she was up here first. Hey, Shai Keenan, how's it going?
Hello, Ash. Hello, the room, the world. Hello, you guys. But hello, Ash. How you doing, darling? I came in a bit too late, so I want to go back over myself. I'll just pop over and look at what you're talking about, and then come back and have incredibly intelligent, smart, and wonderful things to say. I'll be back in a moment. Okay?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and you can take a look at it. I don't know, did I post the link in the chat? If not, I can do that as well. Let me post this in the chat. So if you guys want to read it yourself and follow along, I probably should have done that right away. I'm going to go ahead and post that. And then let me see if I can put that in the nest here. So that way you guys don't have to struggle through my reading it, and you can kind of take a look at yourself on your own time as well. How do you share? Oops. Sorry, guys. Hold on. I'm on this like a small screen here where this becomes very difficult for me to share these things. Hold on. Share text space. Okay. So that should be in the top of our, whatever we call it, the pill or whatever. So you guys can check that out. Taco Loco, what's up?
Hey, yeah, I just took a couple of notes while I was here, and I just thought I'd throw some things out here for you guys to think about, because I've been studying this for a while, like 50 years. That sounds like a golem, and there's a lot of pretty thoughtful people that agree with it. And one of the things we might want to consider is, stop drawing a line between the woo and the tech, because it's all the same thing. We all live in the same universe. As above, so below. We're seeing everything is holofractal, which means a little bit of something represents the larger piece, but just with less refinement. So, like you see it, we're seeing similar cells, we're seeing similar DNAs. I'm just going to throw out a couple of guys that helped me. And, in the spirit of open source, you guys go down the rabbit hole. Rupert Sheldrake talks about the morphogenetic field. I'm pretty sure, that's basically resonance in the ether, or whatever you want to call it, the superforce. And it's communicated by this, longitudinal or 0 point that we've been talking about, which drives, the ball lightning and everything. DNA is really an antenna, and, it can make proteins, but it also receives signals. And, that's what tells it to make those proteins. A good guy to hear about that from is a dude named Bruce Lipton, and his book, The Biology of Belief. You can, look at all these YouTube videos and come up to speed on that. Evolution, as it's described, the survival of the fittest, it just doesn't follow that these are random changes that make you grow fingers or taller or whatever. I mean, there's some kind of a guidance going on there, and that is being caused by something. And that's all of a piece with that. And in the big picture, I think we're learning we can't assume anything or go by consensus. Pull back and say, well, we're seeing this. What could be causing it? I'm at work, but I just thought I'd throw those ideas out and pull back and open up. And it is a fact that what some people consider science or magic is a science at a certain level, and we need to stop dividing that up. I mean, if you gave your iPhone to somebody 100 years ago, they would straight think it's magic.
Yeah, 100%. No, I totally agree.
And that's the end of my filibuster.
I totally agree. I think that we have to be keeping an open mind on this stuff. That's another reason why I wanted to review this today, even though I think that some people may be turned off by it. Other people may go, oh, well, this doesn't have to do with MH370. But anything that I find to be abnormal, anything that I find to be on the fringes of science that has verifiable information that is, related to UFOlogy in general is stuff that I want to get information out there to a bigger audience. So let's jump into some of the other questions that are in the post. There's quite a few in here. So I think I'll go through most of them unless they're not relevant. Here we go. So I'm an entomologist. I understand the text and I'm utterly fascinated by the implications here. I'm also slightly disturbed. So basically, if they could run, the sweat is essentially a urine excrement as well, and the evaporation cools the body. Ammonia evaporates at a much lower temperature than water, so I'm assuming that the method would be more effective. What of bacteria? With that excrement system, I'm assuming the buildup of waste of the biofilm. When exposed to our environment, how could they survive without some opportunistic bacterial infections? I see the immune system hasn't been deeply studied yet, but has there been any signs of infections or susceptibility to our natural biome? An EBO scientist responds, I don't think they were created with long-term survival in mind. They have an innate immune system and the fluid flow is unidirectional in the excretory system. This undoubtedly gives them a bit of a reprieve. They also wear a protective biofilm at times. So the next question. By smooth imagination. The film covering and lack of hair would also suggest that the creatures are barely physical or have a naturally high body temperature and a cool habitat, since there's apparently no need for sweating. Water conservation, I also suggested before, would have mused on possible alien biology and determined from the reports of ammonia smell that they might be excreting through their skin and why they might. And this was a post that somebody else made related to the Virginia incident. That was the name of it. Excretion through the skin rather than through a dedicated route via either the cochlea or a urinal tract in which a dedicated organ flushes out sounds like it could be an adaptation to avoid wasting water. On Earth, terrestrial animals use either urine or a mixture of urine and feces to excrete metabolic products. Birds, reptiles, and some animals like beavers and otters use a cochlea, which is an opening combining both types of excreta. This is also why bird poo is runny and smells differently. A guano does not smell like ammonia. Notwithstanding the possibility that a creature has literally pissed itself, it's quite possible that it excretes these substances through the skin, which build up in the oily surface. Why would a creature do this? In vertebrates, these functions are performed by internal organs, but they could be performed by the skin. Many functions in the liver and kidneys are performed also in other tissues. In cases of dioxin poisoning, for example, the skin undergoes adaptations as a part of an increased detoxifying response occurring in the skin with a marked effect on its appearance. Excretion is performed not only by dedicated organs in the kidneys, it is also performed by the gut and in the skin. The effect in the gut is a type of skin, and the tubes in the kidneys might also be thought of as such. A very oily skin can also indicate a desire to reduce water loss, which might favor the avoidance of a urinary system of excretion. Insects like bedbugs have a waxy coating that prevents evaporation that greatly reduces the water requirement. It's not oily and it isn't a liquid. They also do not excrete through their skin. If one was to, it might be expected to produce a buildup like is described. In effect, the creature might pee and shit through its skin, and it may also obtain energy more preferentially from amino acid degradation, which would mean that it needed a lot more than we do, and it may also, or instead, more completely metabolize towards ammonia than we do, obtain more energy from it. which may be released in part through its lungs. Alternatively, it may not convert the urea like we do, and the smell is due to a similar molecules it prefers to excrete, which happen to be pungent to us. And then the EBO scientist replies to that extremely long post saying, I find they have a certain amphibian appearance. Okay. Somebody else, Electronic Football, commented, with that excrement system, I'm assuming the buildup of waste under the biofilm. I'm also curious about this too. Other lore has claimed the lack of traditional mouth parts and a lack of genitals as well as disposable nature. Taking that seriously, I've wondered if they don't excrete at all or eat even. They just build up toxic byproducts in the system until death and whatever energy that they have had since birth. Similar to butterflies and moths that can't eat after they grow wings, they only live for a short time to reproduce. Now, though, maybe the biofilm is permeable in one direction, but not the other. Just off-gas your waste through your clothes, but don't have to worry about anything getting in. There was no reply to that one. Next person, April Flower 75 mentioned. This makes sense as a semi-permeable membrane where internal pressure might force the molecules outward. EBO scientist replies, yes, exactly. I should have specified that detail. Unknown Michael comments, this is fascinating. Thank you very much for posting it. Although my medical terminology is lacking, I did notice that you said that they're receptive to bovine growth hormones. Do you think there's any relation to the cattle mutilations and their nourishment? EBO scientist replies, I can't say with absolute certainty. It's easier to collect and purify raw material than to synthesize it, at least with our technology. If you want to create a new organism, you need nucleic acids, amino acids, and lipids, which are found in large quantities in all animals. So they're starting to imply there that there might be a reason for all the cattle mutilations related to these creatures that are, synthetic. Sydney Silver. The excretion of waste through their skin has been discussed by John Lear in the following interview, as somebody else mentioned. The relevant section of the interview is at 6 minutes and 20 seconds, and there's the link to that. Regarding the event that occurred in the Virginia, Brazil, the mention of a terrible smell of ammonia coupled with the soldier's death through the form of severe sepsis would appear to be consistent with the report concerning their digestive system. EBO scientist replies, the creature I Googled bears little resemblance to what I saw, but I don't claim to know them at all. No, don't claim to know them all, not at all. Then some technical questions. Genetics, and there's no name on this one. Genetic scarring. Any evidence of similar viral infections or genetic mutations that are detectable across evolutionary timescales? Question 2. Are genetic evolution pertaining to weakening of the jaw muscle that prevented our skull plates from fusing and hence accommodating our growing brain? Has it any detectable traces of manipulation? Question 3. How do homologies show up in their anatomy? The similarities between shared structures across organisms. Number 4, what about HOX, H-O-X genes in embryology? Number 5, is their nervous system similar to ours? I'm going to actually change the way I answer these because it's going to be confusing otherwise. So the genetic scarring question, any similar viral infections or genetic mutations? They reply, none other than the so-called terrestrial gene directly copied. Question 2, our genetic evolution pertaining to weakening of the jaw muscle that prevented our skull plates from fusing and hence accommodating growing brain. They say the artifacts of human evolution are not present. They don't have wisdom teeth or coccyx either, if you must know. I have no knowledge of their potential influence on our evolution. Number 3, how do homologies show up in their anatomy? The similarities between shared structures across organisms. We can see, we can see single nucleotide polymorphisms in human genes that relate to different human populations. I've never used a clustral W on their sequence. Number 4, what about HOX genes, HOX, and embryology? They are probably present in one way or another since the EBOs have a definite body plan. Don't expect me to know every gene and specific action. What's more, we don't have embryos to work with, so fetal maturation is a little extrapolated. 5, is their nervous system similar to ours, as in lateralization? What about language areas like Wernicke and Broca's? There's no structure comparable to the human brain other than what I've mentioned, was the response. And then the last question from this person, the telomeres, how do these organisms age? And they say there is no telomeres. The chromosomes are circular like a plasmid. And then the person replied, I will ask more technical questions based on your reply to these. I think this was actually Punjabi Batman was the person who was asking that question. Yeah, it was. And we know Punjabi Batman because Punjabi Batman was one of the most consistent contributors to the MH370 case. People actually tried to say that Punjabi Batman was EBO Scientist based on this back and forth question here that we're going through. Because then Punjabi Batman replies again, damn, okay, wow, I'm taking you more seriously and lean on you being truthful. Out of curiosity, I'll ask some more questions. Copper can be highly toxic. We know the mechanism. It can lead to death. Copper is very heavy metal and it may induce severe oxidative stress on cells leading to cellular death, etc. I'm curious to know how such high levels of copper... you guys can still hear me, right? Crap. Did this crash? Sorry, guys. God dang it. Hopefully we're back. One sec. Where is it, guys? What happened? I think just crashed. Yeah, you guys can hear me, but I think that the space just crashed. Okay, can you guys hear me again? Are we back? Can anyone just confirm? Give me an emote or something. Shai Keenan, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, we're back. Sorry about that, guys. Thing crashed. Thankfully, we didn't lose everything. Give me 1 second, and we'll go back to right where I was here. Okay, so Punjabi Batman was asking follow-up. Copper can be highly toxic. We know the mechanism. I'm curious to know how such high levels of copper are tolerated. They responded, that's a very good question. Most of the copper is sequestered on the surface of the erythrocytes. Okay. Second one, you claim they have high glucose intake. How do they digest it? What enzymes do they use? Do they have comparable things to insulin? As for proteins, what type of proteases do they secrete in their digestive tract? Probably some amylase or another. The aim of the project is not to identify this enzyme. Anyway, there isn't a molecular biologist on Earth who like proteases. Okay. Protein digestion creates urea, which is removed by our kidneys and excreted in urine. Where does this excess urea go, or how is it removed? Is the organ in the middle acting as the liver and the kidney? As mentioned in my text, there is no urea cycle. Remember that ammonia is a precursor to urea. Ammonia is quickly evacuated after each blood cycle because it passes directly through the hepatorenal organ. Its toxicity is limited by its rapid evacuation. Question 4. Lack of a vocal organ means they do not use verbal language. Do they use telepathy or sign language? What is their base mode of communication? Theory of mind is what I'm trying to tie to it. And they say they do have a vocal organ. I specified that in the respiratory system part. They actually mentioned in that part up above that they vibrate this organ and that can produce sound. Can we extract their DNA and inject it into human beings using something like CRISPR? This is relevant to what we were talking about before. Sure, but CRISPR-Cas9 have limitations with the size of the insert, so it'd be tricky to do. Moreover, the insert must be able to be translated faithfully to its native state maybe, like what it is done in the cell lines such as EBI-G11. And then they ask, what are the DNA base codes? ATGC, what combination do they bind in? What about RNA and uracil? Yes, ATCG. 7. Do they have any potassium ion or other ionic pumps in any cells? In neurotransmission, there is a change of a few MVs between firing, action potential, etc. at minus 55 MVs. Do they have any such methods? Yes, they do, but the surface proteins have not been studied in detail. We assume the entire machinery of the cell is equivalent to what is known in humans to do shortcuts. Question 8, do they have any neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, glutamate? 8, most likely, I don't have any depth of knowledge on the subject, but they have neurons and extracellular communication in the synaptic cleft, which must be similar. 9, the extra number of glial cells makes sense to clean up the excess waste from the enlarged brain and more neurons firing. Just an observation. Yes, that is probably their role. 10. Can we synthesize a clone for ourselves given that we have their DNA? We would have to be able to generate an embryo and able to have a sort of synthetic uterus. Given the number of workers, it may still be a distant project. 11. If they are asexual, they'd be evolutionary unstable and gene pool diversity would be horrible. Do we have any reminiscence of such bad mutations spreading across their gene pool? Or is that what they're trying to do, genetic experiments on us to enhance their survivability? I will stop here for now and thanks again. And then the response is only one genome has been sequenced, so we cannot compare, but it is speculated that all are identical clones, probably generated from the same source. So that's really interesting because there's this idea that they are all manufactured and they're all exact clones of one another, which is pretty wild. And then Punjabi Batman asked one more question. Oh, and how can you elaborate, and can you elaborate on their cellular division? As in, do they have mitosis? As they lack sexual organs and a gamete, I guess they don't have meiosis. Also, does their DNA strand get cut in half via enzymes, and then the corresponding base pairs align to form a new strand is made? Do ribosomes read the singular strand of the messenger RNA to express proteins? EBO Scientist responds, cell division is done by mitosis, but a somewhat strange version that has undefined protein actor given the circularity of their chromosomes. My knowledge is limited to beautiful images of confocal microscopy. Okay. Well, that was a read. So they're bioengineered worker bees. Any elemental components that are unattributable to our biome? Yes, we know they're disposable. I think we already mentioned that. Unable to live without technological support, and they're ephemeral. The only suitable hypothesis is that they're here to accomplish a task. I think we mentioned that already. Were there any trace metals, minerals, or radioactive isotopes not found on Earth? No, I don't think so. Everything seems very local. Okay, cross-posted to UFOs. You seem legitimate in your reasoning and concerns, and this type of post deserves to be in front of a bigger audience. Definitely appreciate the time. At first, I wanted to write there, but since my specialty is quote-unquote aliens and not UFOs, I figured this would make more sense. So they're actually answering the question there in terms of why they went to the aliens subreddit instead of like the UFOs subreddit. Also, I think they probably found out the hard way that all of Reddit is federal controlled and why they got deleted. Because if this is a hoax, there's no reason to delete this whatsoever, right? Somebody said, you better have a VPN. Government gets a hold of these keywords and you're done. They said, I do. That didn't really do them any service because they ended up getting deleted in real time. There was a 4chan post somebody mentioned in May from someone who claimed to have intimate knowledge of efforts for UFO crash retrieval. I might do a follow-up on this. There's a link to it here as well. They would say that UFOs are primarily unmanned drones, that UFOs are built to spec each time they're deployed, that UFOs are created by a mobile construction facility that hides in the ocean, that the construction facility destroys anything that comes close to it and will disappear for days when approached aggressively. The U.S. believes the facility has been active on Earth for at least 100 years or longer. And I know this is outside what you described as your experience, but does any of this seem credible to you? And EBO Scientist responded, yes, very believable. If their vehicles are custom built for a specific purpose, there seems to be the same philosophy behind the drivers with their modular DNA. So they're saying that there's a connection there between this idea that the UFOs will be built to spec as well as the beings being built to spec. Another person replies, this is absolutely fascinating. I'm sending this link to my dad. So, OP, you seem to say that these greys were genetically designed using animal genes from Earth as well as unknown genes. Does that mean that the greys were created specifically for interacting with humankind? Are greys the middleman between humanity and an unknown group? EBO Scientist replies, the hypothesis is they were created to perform tasks and they were able to survive with only local resources. They must therefore be able to metabolize local organic resources. So they don't really answer, but they're being kind of coy there with that. Someone says, likely written by AI. And then they reply, you give me too much credit. AI don't make typos. Someone else says, thank you for writing this up. If you don't mind, a couple of questions. Why have some areas been studied more thoroughly than others? Is this a result of the organization's priorities, or is there some science-based rationale? In your opinion, how efficient was the operation? Are there any medical advances that you can point to where we are derived or influenced by this research? Finally, compared to ours, how underdeveloped do our brains seem to be? There are few scientists and few carcasses. So certain analyses are prioritized, I don't believe that any advances in molecular biology have been directly derived from the project. We use biomolecular tools available on market. Pancake Breakfast asks, thanks. Damn shame that there haven't been real benefits from this. If true, fundamental immune system research alone could potentially help so many. Cheers. The purpose of the research is very oriented on certain aspects and structures. Many shortcuts are taken and many assumptions are made. Someone else mentions, a couple of thoughts. Would their blood being higher in copper concentration act as an antibacterial of sorts and justify not having an immune system as their blood is an immune system? Could it also be that the food they consume, assuming that it's liquid, is blood, high in protein and copper? Would that explain all the animal mutilations where the blood is removed from the animals that are found? A blood with a high concentration of copper, for me, is a sign of toxicity if there was not a normal mechanism to counterbalance it. As for the blood, it would need to have a higher sugar concentration to be a good nutrient source. Can they communicate through telepathy? It is speculated that the nodules in the center lobe of the brain could be used for this, but I don't see how it could be possible. We'll do, actually, let's see if there's anyone who wants to jump in now. Shai Keenan, do you have any thoughts? Or I will also jump in and have Nathan jump up, and Nathaniel jump up here as well. Do you guys have any thoughts before we proceed? There's a few more questions, and then we'll do a little bit more roundtable, and then we'll close it out.
Okay, I mean, obviously, look, the questions are more scientific than they sound, but I wanted to know, for example, can they sing and can they fart? I know that sounds like a dumb question, but the scientists understand what I'm asking.
Yeah, so I can't say that I'm EBO Scientist, so I cannot, I don't know, I don't remember that they answering those questions, but I like that your way of thinking, right, is like, how human are they, right? So they definitely can't fart because they don't have an anus. And it seems like they excrete waste through their skin. So they have a completely different excretory system of removing waste than we would do. From a singing perspective, I think they did mention there is some type of vibrational capability between what would be the equivalent of their lungs. But they don't have, I think they said they don't have a thorax. I could be saying this incorrectly, or they don't have the same components that we have in order to be able to speak. So
vocal cords.
Yes, there's no vocal cords, right? Yeah, thank you. So my guess is that they can sing, quote unquote, in some way, but probably wouldn't be the same way that we would expect. Nathan or Nathaniel, do you have any questions or comments? I guess they're not really questions because I can't answer.
Hey. Yeah. No, I had an angle on this. So again, I'm borrowing from Dr. Greer, and I'm assuming that what he's saying is truthful, and I'm using it as like a template. And what's interesting, I was just transcribing that like nearly 4-hour talk, and I have a couple of things pulled up here. So basically, the long story short is, it seems possible that this might not be alien. It might be man-made alien. And it would make sense if there is research being done on these in like a unacknowledged special access project where this guy doesn't even know that they're being created somewhere else. But a couple of things that were said, just to quote here, talking about the cattle mutilations. Greer is also saying that this is us doing this, and that the reason for the cattle mutilation is it's very easy to clone one of these things, but you need some kind of biological medium, and that's where the cattle mutilations provide. The other mutilations provide the biological medium for these experiments and development of man-made fake ETs. Going on, he says, they're mutilating them, but it creates a source of biological substrate material for the nanobiomachines. And what's interesting, if you look at the nanobiomachines, that's like right on the Battelle National Biodefense. But I don't have any knowledge about all this, so I don't know how common some of these technologies are, and it could just be points that seem to align. I just think it could be a possible explanation to things, that these are ours, engineered, and yeah, so there's that.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting aspect that I never considered, is what if we made these things, right? What if we're making aliens out there? One thing I think back to is when I was a little bit younger, during the Bush administration, he outlawed I think he outlawed cloning. And everybody was that back then, early 2000s, we were thinking, oh, we're going to start to be able to clone human beings pretty soon. And this same concept, well, I mean, same idea of cloning is, you can develop an artificial being as well. And I think that at the time it was at least in the United States, the religious right that was primarily against it, but everybody was kind of against it because I don't think anybody wants to see a clone of themselves appear, like in the movie Nope. Do you have a follow-up, Nathaniel?
Yeah, I was just going to add with the cloning that tracks that we've been doing it. That Dolly, the sheep, or the Chinese scientist that did it and was condemned by his government in the 2000s or something like that. That it's just not happening publicly. It's not front facing. That seems to be. There's one more thought that made this connection too, but I think I'll leave it at that for there, and I'm hoping that other folks can get in on this.
Yeah, cool. Let's do some more questions try to get through the rest of these questions on this list. This thing's a lot longer than I remember it being. Okay, so then somebody else, Traveler Aerith, asks, why did you only look at the genome and the proteome? I don't even know how to pronounce that word. I misspelled it, pronounced it like 5 times. Why was the transcriptomy not considered? Research is directed towards a specific goal. There are structures of interest in the brain, and their proteome is very important. Proteome, I don't know. The next logical step would be the study of the protein interactions. The transcriptome, whatever, is difficult to elucidate after death due to the action of the RNAs. What transfer of RNA genes did you identify? There are none that I'm aware. Could TPRs be a unique transposable element? Were there other identifiable transposons? And they say they are not transposons. They are rather addressed to indicate the position of the gene. They are probably also act as a cleavage site for some type of endonuclease megacomplex. Do they have a microbiome? I'm so fascinated by the immature digestive system and curious if it would compensate with a more exotic biome. They should have one. They have a rudimentary immune system and wear a biofilm as clothing. I assume that they must be exposed to microorganisms in the mouth, nostril, and ear. No importance is given to the study of the microbiology of these creatures. And then they say, is your company hiring? I study transfer RNA and its modifications. There's a large piece of the puzzle missing here, and it likely has to do with the epitranscriptome or whatever that means. They say probably because there's a high turnover and it's a dead-end job. That's kind of sad about the state of government jobs and working on EBOs and aliens. So Citizen of Danksburg says, was any work done to study their metabolome? I don't know what that means. I work as a statistician in metabolemics. We specifically use a chemocentric approach to metabolemics, whatever. We've done some wacky studies, so I'd be curious if we ever processed any samples that were EBO in origin. We frequently do work with the DoD and DARPA. For those saying it's a LARP, I disagree. This was too technical to be a LARP. This checks out with some other information that we suspect to be true regarding the grays and possibly cow mutilations. Bovine serum is a very valuable resource and is being studied and used and try to create meat in the lab, in vitro or in vivo research. Thank you for posting. Fantastic post. Share it with tons of people. Last question, do they have a tongue? Your post seems to indicate that they don't due to the way they digest their food and communicate, but I just thought I'd ask just in case. The lack of teeth, small lips, lack of vocal cords, and their minimal digestive system seems to suggest that these entities do not possess a tongue. And they reply, keep in mind that the proteome knowledge is far from being comparable to what is known for humans. The main research priority was to identify the proteome of nodules in the central lobe of the brain. If there is any research on the metabolome, whatever, it would undoubtedly be in these structures as a priority. They have no tongue. Okay, so no tongue. I haven't read everything in detail, but can you expand on the document on their religion? We mentioned that part. I think he says, if you see my edit, you responded there. Oh, you want to know? And then they reply again, say, oh, it works? Of course I can. Give me a minute. And said, no, there's nothing of scientific merit. I'm not sure if we were missing a question on that one. Somebody else replied, just finished. You mentioned you read about their culture and religion. Can you tell us more about that? As you can see my edit, I responded about their religion. Their culture is seemingly centered on fulfillment of this religious motivation. Then there's a David Grush question. David Grush recently said the Vatican is fully aware of non-human intelligence. Do you believe humans have adopted this religion in any way, placing importance on the souls instructed by these aliens? There was no response to that. Somebody else said, why would the documents on their religion and culture be included in an archive room at your facility? It seems to be at odds with the idea of compartmentalization unless that material was thought to be somehow very relevant to your work. And then somebody said, then they replied, I'm not sure, to give some kind of insight maybe. And then another question, do you have any idea how they received those bodies? Did you know if any of them live or have or heard about live specimens being housed at other locations? And then they reply, they were probably discovered in a crash given the obvious trauma. It's implied that there are other carcasses than those that I observed. Somebody else replied, what I found is interesting is the tie between what you wrote and what Bob Berman and Robert Lanza talked about in their books regarding biocentrism. It seems they follow the same religious scientific pathway, albeit with slight deviations. Thoughts? To be honest, I don't believe what is said about their religion. It doesn't really make any sense scientifically. So you can tell here that EBO Scientist doesn't even, maybe some of the stuff's disinformation that they're being fed. Somebody else asks, have you heard of genetic engineering involving people in EBOs, aka hybrid research? They said EBOs are hybrids between two biospheres themselves. So I think they're saying that the EBOs are theoretically the hybrids. Somebody else says, why do you say only two? Could it be more? This is amazing. Thank you. And EBO Scientist replies, says, you're right. It may be more, but we don't have any evidence to go above two. So they're talking about more than two different biospheres. I mean, we don't know what any other biospheres look like, right? You mentioned having read it in literature on their culture. Can you expand on that? What is their culture? Does it shed light on why they're here? I replied to one comment with the same info. Anyway, their culture is seemingly centered on the fulfillment of the religious motivation. Okay. Someone asked, do they have names? There was no response. Somebody asked, were there any indicators or contextual clues within these materials that might suggest how fresh or old that information was? Decades old versus more recent, for example. While I'm curious if there's any scientific dates mentioned, if they weren't available or permissible to share, the general time frame is something I'm curious about. From a non-UAP, non-human intelligence government experience, I understand documents of these types, compilations of data, briefing documents, often will cite a year time frame for the data to provide context to the reader. And then EBO Scientist said, some documents were clearly typewritten. The one document dealing with religion was a good example. Those on the gross anatomy are also like this. I have no memory of dates, unfortunately. Somebody else asked, great write-up. Any ideas on where they come from? This EBO Scientist says, no idea. Probably from a distance that allows panspermia over a geological era. So pretty far away, I guess. Okay, somebody else asks, what was your reaction to finding out we're not alone in the universe in such a stark manner? Was it shocking to you in any way? Any indication of how this all started? What our role in government is playing in it? What our ultimate objective is? EBO Scientist replied, the ultimate goal is to be able to understand the purpose of the nodules in the central lobe of the brain. This is apparently essential to their use of technologies. The program is probably an offshoot of ongoing programs that studies engineering. So this is interesting because I think a lot of people have brought up this idea that that they use some type of interface. I think even Bob Lazar maybe mentioned that when he talked about the ship, the UAPs, he said that there was no steering wheel or anything. So perhaps they used something else. So there's a lot of tie-ins here to stuff that we see in UFOlogy. Somebody else said, this was fascinating, although I'm not a scientist and the information was largely above my head. I enjoy reading it. Thank you. Is there anything I can't explain in layman's terms? I don't know if that was a reply or some of these comments started to get deleted in real time. Somebody else asked, if the blood is copper-based, why is it brown and not blue or green color? I'm assuming this based on our red blood being iron-based. My brother asked, and I have no idea. And he said, it's brown because if you mix red, yellow, and green, then you get brown. And that's red blood cell, yellow plasma, and green copper. You get brown. Okay. Another long one here. We're getting near the end here, so thanks for hanging with us. It is very interesting to read. I have been writing about what we might expect alien biology to be like using a guide as reports. I did conclude that they excrete protein waste through their skin to account for the smell, had underdeveloped stomachs, had unidirectional airflow like birds, and potentially separate trachea and esophagus all the way through. You mentioned that the specimens have no vocal cords. Do they communicate via sound from a specialized organ, and where would it be? In terms of genetic similarity, this doesn't surprise me. The DNA on the planet has been pretty uniform in a basic structure, yet protobiogenic processes continue and across the vast chemical environment of the Earth, and over 7 billion years, nothing else is developed that is better. So it must be one of the best possible arrangements that chemical processes and metabolisms would favor being discovered by evolution. And also I have to conclude it is very likely to be a common form of life and intrinsic to the phenomenon of life. I recall the crop circle with the description of aliens having triple-stranded DNA. Is there any organelle or report of EBE having this arrangement? On the digestive system, obviously this is a major source of weight and volume in the human body, and largely necessary only to cope with the large varieties of foods. Their arrangement is anticipated by myself and more optimal for space travel, but efficiency in general as well. I recall one report from somewhere, probably an abductee, that they grew their own food bioreactors, and that was some sort of special growth culture. They contained all nutrients that they needed in a very digestible form. With the film covering them, the obvious benefit to me is that avoiding microbial contamination and infection. EBO Scientist responds to that whole thing by saying, vocal cords, this details in the section regarding the respiratory system. Vocalization is produced by vibration of the wall membrane at the junction between the two air sacs. I specified that two biospheres have a common origin, probably panspermia. 3 strands of DNA are just an imagination. Imagine the steric hindrance of such a structure. The digestive system is undoubtedly designed in a way to limit autonomy. And a couple more questions. I think we're close here. I hope so. Did you pick up info as to who is creating the Greys or what their purpose is? Also, others have mentioned in the info about their culture and religion. I'd be interested in that as well. And do you have information? And if you have this information are real, thank you for taking the risk of sharing it. If you're a lying piece of shit, F you, LOL. All I know is that they must have been created here. There is speculation that these creatures can be controlled remotely like drones. Maybe they're like avatars in the movie of the same name. Somebody else asks, can you discern anything about their longevity from what you saw, the length of their telomeres? What does their ribosome look like? What kind of athletic ability would they be capable of? And were they easy to cut or pierce? What about the suit? EBO Scientist responded to that by saying, my comment on longevity is extrapolation only. I should have clarified there is no telomere, whatever, because their chromosomes are circular like a plasmid. Their ribosome look like a regular ribosome, at least functionally. It is not the focus of research to do, crystallography, fortunately. Their muscles are mostly type 1 fibers, so they're physically very weak. Somebody says, I have no idea if this is real or fake. And then they reply, you shouldn't blindly believe me, and I don't expect you to. It's a sensible thing to do in this situation. After all, I'm only offering a fairy tale and anonymity. The fact that you are present on this forum, which deals with alien life, tells me that you are questioning the very nature of reality. I only hope that the information I can offer can give a new perspective and new ideas. That's a pretty good answer to that question. Somebody else asks, very interesting. I would love to see you now speak in layman's terms, or I think that's what they're saying, layman's terms to the questions asked. They'll say they'll try. Is the cell cycle the same? Do the chromosomes replicate biodirectionally like in bacteria? And then EBO Scientist says, I answer a similar question. Cell division is done by mitosis, but a somewhat strange version that has unidentified protein actor given the circularity of the chromosomes. My knowledge is limited to beautiful images of confocal microscopy. I think we already heard that one. Okay, this is probably an inventive creative writing exercise. If actually true, there's no use asking OP for details. They made it quite clear that they don't want life intrusions of being a whistleblower. Cool read either way. And then EBO Scientist says, I give details on everything I know except about myself. The one thing I want to mention about that is that I like when people give information and let people come to their own conclusions. As you guys can tell from the investigation that I've done, that's the same thing that I'm doing. It's not meant to be about me. It's not meant to be about this person either, right? And to me, that adds credibility to it. I think that as humans, we all want to just know whether or not we can trust someone to tell us the truth, but that's not how things should work. People should be able to absorb the information and come to their own conclusions. Okay. Let me see. I'm going to skip ahead to some of this stuff here. So EBO Scientist says, to a slew of questions that are out there, I don't think there's enough sugars in the human body to satisfy their nutritional needs, except for perhaps diabetics. So people, I guess, were asking whether or not they might drink human blood. They might farm us, right? And I think they're basically saying no. The proper authorities are the ones who created the program. So somebody said, please clarify opposable thumb on the medial side, ? And then they replied, medial is a term that refers to the location of the structure in relation to the middle of the body. Thumbs are on the same side of the hands as us. Let's see. Someone in the two last questions here, we're almost done. Is it in I don't know if this is supposed to be an acronym, USA MIRID, and then, this must be like a USA, like some type of facility, and then they reply back just saying Battelle National Biodefense Institute. So Battelle is another one of these companies that I learned about like last year. That's a huge third party, like they do advanced research and technology, but they don't seem to have any commercial sphere in space. And then the very last post, EBO Scientist says, I've received some very strange and somewhat disconcerting private messages. Please treat this text as what it is, just words on a screen, and don't do anything you will regret. I will leave for the evening, although it's still early. I specify that the passage on religion is third-hand information and should not be your new gospel. I will have time to answer more questions later, which they never did. So, everybody, thank you for listening to the EBO Scientist post here. Anyone who wants to throw up any comments, say anything, now's your chance. After we've let everybody give their chances, we're going to go ahead and close out on this, just to keep this space pretty tight for anyone who wants to kind of listen in and think about it in general in the future. So Nathaniel or anybody else, if you want to talk, request. And if you just want to say anything, just speak up. No need for hands.
I just wanted to add that the part about the programmability and the remote control and the limited lifespan and the being created here, that seems to lend more to the human created thing. And if we've had anti-gravity since the 60s, then this isn't out of range, it seems.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that as well. And I think that what you see with the technology, and as this technology is kind of advancing, is that all the stuff kind of lines up where it's like, okay, if this is possible, then that's possible. And this is part of the reason why you got to be a little careful about what I call falling into the rabbit hole. But especially as I'll plug my Hard Truths podcast, which I'm going to be doing with Timothy Abarino on Saturday. I think that a lot of what we're going to be talking about is this idea of what is the next evolution of humanity with regards to this technology. Like, if we begin to integrate this technology, like what can we really achieve? And can we achieve, some type of new post-human biology? And maybe that biology is similar to what we're talking about here, where you can make like avatars, or maybe that's something that we need to be thinking about spiritually in general, in terms of what our soul means, why we have uniqueness, why we have consciousness in general. So I think that this whole piece kind of opens the whole door up for what is life in general, and what should we expect when we think about aliens. Maybe there are giant jellyfish floating creatures that are out there. I think that things can get very abstract. Go ahead, Nathaniel.
I was just going to add another point to against it being something like extraterrestrial or even maybe ultra-terrestrial. I mean, actually both points. So it's extraterrestrial and they can move on multiples of the speed of light. We don't need the long spacefaring, multiple generation, drone operated theory of interplanetary beings moving under the speed of light. All those theories support being able to make it here, and how do you get here? Well, maybe you have a 1,000-year ship and they're just cloning themselves, or they wait and then clone themselves whenever they get here. But if you can move at superluminal speeds, then you don't need that. And if you're already here and you have the technology to be underground, you might not need to have generated beings walk out for you. You probably can master the landscape.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I would say that depends on what the technology can do, right? So as part of our other investigation, we've been disclosing this idea of superluminal speeds being possible, but that doesn't just mean that there's not limitations. A lot of people, especially when it comes to UFOs, think, well, if you have achieved a certain level of technological superiority, that you're just invincible. But I don't think that's the case. I think that there's always going to be vulnerabilities. So if I think back to my discussion with Roy D. Herbert about the science of superluminal speeds, his thought, well, if you reduce your mass and you increase your time, so your time speeds up, like a fly. Well, what do we know about flies? Is they only live for a day, at least from our relative perspective when we stare at them. So if you increase your speed, you might increase your time, or you might cause like rapid aging to occur. So there might actually still be a need, depending on how the physics really play out, for this type of produce it when you get there type of situation. And the thing I think is interesting about that is that, maybe that's the reason why why there might be the terrestrial hypothesis or ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, is that they have to be produced locally. What was the show called? I think Altered Carbon was the TV show, where they talk about like sleeves and like you just kind of insert your soul, and that's how you get around the issue of distance between planets. And that starts to get weird with time as well, because essentially that means like when you go back to wherever you were before, like, it's going to be hundreds or thousands of years later. Kimberly, oh wait.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
I just wanted to add, you were talking about the Roy D. Herbert moment, and that time dilation thing is just fascinating. But if the fly, for example, has a short life and it sees things in slow motion, if we have a very complex being with levels of thought that would have to be in the complexity too, they might have. Anyway, I'm going to back off. I don't know enough about it, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, is that thing about flies seen in slow motion true? Because if so, that would corroborate the whole idea of their time being faster, because that's the same exact concept of like in Interstellar, when someone's near the black hole and their time is slowed down and they're looking out at the space station, which time is faster, they're going to see the space station moving in super speed. And if you are the person in the space station whose time is moving faster than the person who's near the black hole, and you're looking at that person, it's going to look like they are moving in super slow-mo. So I think that is a very interesting thing to look into with respect to the fly and whether or not its time is moving faster. Kimberly, I saw you jump up. Do you have any comments?
Yeah. What if they're interdimensional? So what if there's a sixth dimension being that's cloning three-dimensional things to go explore the third dimension?
Yeah, it's a good thought.
Would that explain the time dilation thing too?
Well, from that perspective, I think it depends on what these extra dimensions mean. For me, once you get past 4 dimensions, it starts to not make a lot of sense, just because I think of like up, down, and straight forward as the first 3 dimensions. And then up, left, and forward is the first 3 dimensions. And I think of time as the 4th dimension. And then beyond that, if there's a 5th dimension, I would think of it as like, what's the underlying matrix? And so if there is a being that is existing on the outside, like if we were to imagine a snow globe and we're staring down at it, and that snow globe is our universe that we're comprised of, then absolutely, I think that you start to have the capability where a being could just show up wherever it wants to, right? Where it's a similar concept of me being on the computer, and the computer is our universe, and I can just kind of insert myself as an avatar anywhere I want, anywhere in the program, etc. I think that could account for that type of thing, but really hard for us to know because we're stuck inside of it, right? And we can't perceive that underlying matrix. We can only perceive the reality over the top.
But so they're saying that they had to have been made on this planet. in that, right? Did I get that
Yeah.
right?
I think that what they're saying, yeah, is that, and again, this opens it up to your theory that you just brought up, but the idea that they're using the chemicals and biological processes that are available here, and they said that their biosphere was like a combination of two different things. So probably a combination of what we have here that's available, but that it comes from somewhere else. I think they mentioned the idea of panspermia, so that some part of it doesn't seem to match what we find here locally.
Well, panspermia I thought was like just stuff coming from space falling
Yep.
on us. Yeah.
Yep, pretty much. But if you think about what the underlying mechanism of what that means is that the idea is that we can tell that whatever we're seeing from there comes from somewhere else. That's not completely attributable to evolution here
To
on Earth.
Earth.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And then even the person mentions in this EBO post that someone asked, well, is it just two locations like Earth and Mars, or is it could be more? And they said, well, it could be more because we don't know, right? We don't have a biome of another planet or anywhere thing like that, so be unsure.
Yeah, since we don't know what the sixth dimension is, it still could be that. It doesn't have to be like an alien from a billion light years away, right?
Yeah, it could be from anywhere, right? And I think that just depends
Okay.
on what your perception is of extra dimensions in general, right? But once you go beyond the dimensions that we can see and the dimension of time, then you're really kind of dealing with just essentially like teleportation, so to speak, in terms of being able to be somewhere or anywhere else, so you could in the universe instantaneously.
True.
So, yeah, not sure. Good thoughts on that.
Okay.
Any other response or closing thoughts on that? Okay. If not, then I think I'm going to close it out here. I just want to thank everybody for jumping in and reviewing the EBO Scientist Physiology of the Alien with us. If you guys want, you can share the space afterwards. There's also live streaming at the same time. Oh, looks like we might have one more. Nathaniel, he might have one more comment before we close out. I'll let him jump up. And then I think we'll close this out in general. Go ahead, Nathaniel.
Hey, sorry, I just wanted to add, I know that we might not have other moderators on, but just real big thanks for everything. And I might encourage to not let this disappear again. Maybe this is worth revisiting again. And now that everybody's downloaded the information and, I've read it twice now, it's worth thinking about a little bit more. And it seems that it might be corroborated. Since it was deleted in a day, I don't know how much air this has gotten. And so I think it could be valuable to get some other people on the case that have more knowledge in the science, and they might be able to, figure some things out here. But anyway, thanks much.
Yeah, and so that's like the next step here, right? So what I'm trying to do in terms of the MH370X movement is get other people and empower other people to be investigators into stuff like this. Like, I don't have the medical or academic background to know if a lot of the stuff checks out. From reading the comments, you can tell a lot of people are pretty impressed by it. But someone who does have that kind of background, who is interested and curious, could investigate this type of stuff and determine, does this check out, right? There's a lot of verifiable information in here that can be looked into. And that's the kind of what I want to impose upon this community, is that also what's going to happen too is that as more and more stuff comes out, we might find congruencies between the stuff that we're reading here. Right, and if we do, then that's going to lend more credit and evidence towards this potential post being real. Even as stuff like today, what was mentioned, I think, by Jeremy Corbell, where he mentioned this idea that humans, whatever, might be containers. Right, it's kind of goes to that philosophy that we read in there. Although I'd say that philosophy side is probably the one that's the least verifiable, right, compared to the scientific aspects of it. So just to close it out, I would say that keep this one in the back of your mind. If you find stuff that comes up, pull this out of your hat and take a look at it, take a read of it, and see, hey, does this match up with the science that EBO Scientist person posted out there, back in 2023? And who knows? Maybe in the future we'll figure it out. Like, this is, I guess, open source intelligence. This is us looking at stuff that's out there, digging into it, and determining the authenticity and matching it up to other evidence that we have out there in the UFO world. So thanks everybody for jumping on today. Thanks for jumping on the space. Appreciate all the time. And for those interested, we will be getting back into some MH370 stuff over the weekend. So thank you guys and have a great evening. Bye everybody. Okay. Thanks everybody on the live stream as well. Everyone who joined in here today and went over the EBO Scientist stuff. Let me switch this over real quick. So that was fun. Are there any last thoughts from the chat about that? Sorry, didn't give you guys a lot of attention. I tried to do my best, but I just thought that was an important one to get out there because a lot of people told me they didn't know about it. And I think that, you know, a lot of it obviously goes even over my head, but some of the stuff that we see out there seems to be consistent with some of the documentaries and some of the other knowledge that's been passed out there. I also think about this idea of what Tucker Carlson was talking about the spirituality of the phenomenon and whether or not, like, you know, this is this dark concept of the phenomenon that's out there and whether or not, you know, we are ourselves hybrids, or we are species that has had our biology and evolution tampered with. So pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, seems very credible. I don't know if it's true or not. I just want to make sure the information's out there. So I'm going to take it easy tonight after this. I'm going to look into some more MH370 stuff. I'm going to be watching some more of those videos that people have been linking to me. Tomorrow we're going to go into Timothy Aberino, and we're going to prepare for the interview with him. I still haven't determined if it's going to be a live stream or not, but if not, I will try to upload it later on Saturday on the same day. So thanks everybody. I hope everyone has a good night. You can